Okay, welcome back to part two. So here we go. By now, hopefully, if you listen to part one, you're trying to practice getting the actual equation or the linear function for this asset problem we did from some Magellan fund. So hopefully you have at least something down or a good attempt here, and it'll help you for the future midterms. But if you remember, in the last video, we talked about always writing down for every word problem what you have, what you want, and then figuring out what kind of equation to kind of pursue in your quest to solve this thing. So we've already done this first page here. And if you're looking at the second page, I'm actually going to skip ahead and you'll see why in a second. But if you already kind of know, and I've done this enough, and you'll find the pattern too, that the equation, once you have that, it can answer all your other questions. Usually, it's kind of hard to kind of conjecture and substitute something for a variable if you don't know what's going on. At least for me, that's how I look at it. So again, I'm different. Everybody's different. No problem. If you have a better way to do this, please do it. As long as you get the right answer, that's okay. But really, in part G, they're asking us to find an algebraic model for the information that we had earlier. And remember, if you forgot the information, I think it was in red, if I'm remembering my colors. Oh, at times 0, 51.243 billion. Remember, this was time and this was money. And I'm kind of labeling my variables now, even though I skipped the part, I think, that I shouldn't do that. So 1 second here while I write this down. So that's my information from before. Let's see. Oh, part E. Let's not skip this. The most important part of doing anything, including find out what you have, what you want, and how you're going to proceed. The variables are the first part. We kind of did that even in the last video where I said X was time in years. And Y was money in billions. And it doesn't matter what problem you have, as soon as you start doing enough of them, that's always you're either doing this in the back of your head or going to prove it at the end anyway. So please, please, please make it a habit of doing that. You'll get points for doing it and marks off if you don't. So not that I'm trying to penalize anybody, but it's that important. So make sure if you ever see clearly define the variables going forward, it's going to be assumed that you have to do it to get some points, even if it's a big O sentence. Always define your variables. Even if I don't ask for it, make sure you put it somewhere and put a little star by it. So, hey, my variables are defined, and then you can go forward. Okay. We will skip F for a minute. Take a look at G, though. Define an algebraic model. And we already talked about, that this is going to be our model, right? MX plus B. I think it was purple last time. But the first thing, to use the red points, we got to find the slope. And remember that slope is the change in y over the change in x, or y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And you can choose, as long as you're consistent, it doesn't matter which point is x2, x1, or excuse me, x2, y2, or x1, y1, as long as you're consistent. So if this is my y2, 51.243, and actually let's use a bigger number, we'll make the math easier. Let's use 80. 80 point, see how I just switched? 80.19 minus 51.243 over 4 minus 0. Now notice I went from this one minus this one, then you have to do this minus this. If you do it in the reverse order, the slope will still be the same. I promise. The signs will just be off for a second, and at the end, when you work it out, they'll be fine. And you don't have to do it this fast, but on a calculator, I've already done that for us for time's sake. 28.9407 divided by 4. And let's take this up here. If I do that, your real answer is 7.23675, or approximately, because I'm going to start rounding, my slope's going to be 7.237. Okay, so that's my slope. Got it? So now in a different color, there's always two parts of this thing. Part one, get your slope. And then part two, choose your poison. I don't care about the color. Part two, get your B, or your y-intercept. And you should have this should be familiar at this point in the semester. So I'm hoping, if not, you've heard it again. These are quotation marks, or I'm looking at them. It doesn't look proper, being picky. But get your B, and all you have to do that is use your function, y equals, plug your slope in, plus your B. Now I can cheat here because I'm starting in 1997. Remember, this was 1997. My B is going to be right there. You can plug either point because they both lie on your linear function or your line. Either point will give you the same B. And if you wanted me to prove it, you could plug in 4, 80.19, or in this case, I could prove and put 7.237 times 0. Oh, and what is that? 51.243. And the reason I'm saying that is 0 knocks it out. 0 times anything is 0. So I just end up with 51.243. On your test, on your problems, on your homework, it's not enough to stop there. You're really going to want to figure out and write the entire equation. So the entire equation, my answer right here is going to be y equals my slope, which was 7.237x plus the 51.243. Now let's practice a little bit here, even if the questions come again. What does all that mean? That means, and I'm going to ask you for a value and the meaning. The value is right there in front of us, 7.237x plus 51.243. The slope's value is 7.237. The meaning, though, is that this thing is going to make 7, because it's an average rate of change. It's a comparison of two quantities. So if I said, and I'm gonna, on a midterm, what does the slope mean? You're going to say, it means that every 1 year, the value goes up 7.237 billion. Got it? So rewind that, listen to that again. It's crucial. You got to say something about the slope that's two quantities, an x and a y value. And in this case, 7.237 million increase in funds every year. Doesn't matter which one you say first. The other thing I'll ask you is, what does the y-intercept mean? And in this case, that's the y-intercept there, the 51 there, 0.243. So if I said, well, that's the value, and if I said, what's the value? You tell me the number, 51.243. If I said, what does it mean? You're going to tell me that 51.243 was the starting, or what the investment was worth when you started, in this case, in 1997. And then that value there, that number has two meanings too, a time and an actual meaning of the 51. So at time 0 in 1997, it was worth 51.243 billion. So hopefully that was enough there. Now we actually get to do something and use our model to find the precise answer to our question. And we can even figure out our question if we go back here to part F, find the linear equation. We did that. Remember I told you I'd skip this part here in 2 though? So step 2 we can do. What we're going to do, we're going to substitute in for x here. So we're going to substitute 25 for the variable x because we want to know what the value is. Remember, the whole goal was to figure out what we wanted, or how much was what the assets were worth after 25 years. So we're going to substitute the value 25 because we listed that here. That's a time, remember? And we're going to substitute it in for x here to find the money in 2022, which was our desirable goal to start with. So we've come all this way. Let's go ahead and crank it out. And we'll use our function here. And let's see if I can get my colors right so you can follow along more easily. So y is going to equal 7.237 times, I got to put my 25 there in a minute, 51, oh, I can't see it because of my computer here, 0.243. And remember, our whole goal here is to put the 25 in for x. And when you crank all that out, let's use black now, y is going to equal, and again, I've cheated, so you can go ahead and check my math later, but that should, this stuff 7.237 times 25, I think comes to 180.925 plus the 51.243. And if I put those two numbers, my Y value is 232.168. Now, if I've messed up a number, I apologize up front, but the math is just a matter of getting the numbers right on a calculator. What does this mean now? What does that value mean? Notice this is the value of my answer. And I'm going to ask you for meaning here. So it says, write your answer in a complete sentence using the correct numbers and, stuff. You can say, in 2022, assets look to be 232.168, notice, billion. Okay, this is important, and so is the time. Okay, so in other words, for that X, we got 232.168 billion. Okay, or you could write it as this 25, 232.168. And you can do that, but that does not tell as much as a sentence like this, because the whole goal here is actually be able to do something with the math. Okay, and for J, you can do that on your own. You can check your work and errors and see if your estimated part and part D, like we could continue our table. We didn't do it, but we could have continued our table here and gone to 12 years later and then 16 years later and kept going up. I don't know, 29 every time approximately. Remember when we were estimating in the future video? But for time's sake, I'm going to skip that. But hopefully that's a good summary of what the expectations are come midterm time. Okay, so this is just doing it in with one equation. And sometimes, and if we haven't done it already, and I think we've done two equations, which is called the system of equations. So whether it's one equation and you have to answer all this stuff and say what everything means, or two, you should be okay. Okay, if you have any questions, get a hold of me. Thanks for watching.